Hi everybody, good evening and welcome to Melbourne CocoaHeads number 138. I'm Baz and I'll be your MC for tonight. And in case you don't know already, here are some ways you can get in touch with us. The best place to start is in the Slack group. You can get information about everything else from there. First of all, I'd like to say that this meetup is being run from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here with us tonight. Speaking of emerging elders, we want you all to be as safe as possible in our community. And to help with that, we have a code of conduct. If you're being harassed or you notice that someone is in an uncomfortable situation or have any other concerns at all, please get in touch with us. You can do that via the email on this slide or using the anonymous form on the slide, or you can ping someone in Slack. These times that we're physically apart, it's more important than ever to stay socially connected, and our community can only do that and only thrive if we collectively make that happen. The last couple of months have been tough on everyone, we know that, and it's not going to get any easier for us in Melbourne over the next couple of months. So it's not a huge surprise that social engagement has been down, but we've actually really struggled to get speakers for the monthly meetup recently over the last couple of months. Without speakers, the events simply won't happen. So please, if you have any ideas about giving a talk or even anything you want to have a chat about, you've got a vague idea, pop onto the speakers channel on Slack and have a chat about it. Tutoring is available as well if you're new to giving talks in public. We also wouldn't be able to do this meetup without our sponsors, and we thank them hugely for that. Our Gold SponSUR and long-term supporter is Itty Bitty Apps, and our silver sponsors are Latitude Financial, REA Group, and Cognizant. So we give a huge thanks to them for their continued support, and apologies to their respective branding departments for those disasters of slides. I promise we won't use those again. They're one-off. We're not the only community. You might be interested in finding out about upcoming events for Sydney CocoaHeads, who are having their event next week. That's always a really great event. And our cousins over at the Melbourne Google Developer Group, who do some really great events, even if you're not an Android developer per se. They're really interesting anyway. They're going to try and run an event in August about the new Android 11 release and what's coming out in that. And you can find out about more Melbourne CocoaHeads events at the meetup page. All right, let's get on with the show. So Craig and I are very excited to introduce tonight's presenters. I'm going to be doing the introductions, which is what you're listening to now, and then I'll hand over to Raunak for this year in WWDC. He did it last year as well, so this is becoming a bit of a tradition that I like. Then we have a panel discussion about WWDC, mostly, with James, June, and Oliver. And after the presentations are finished, there'll be a Zoom catch-up, sort of after party, instead of going to the pub. And given the nature of the events these days, being online, discussions and questions are going to be in the Slack group. There's a link available in the YouTube live stream, and if you want to chat in the Meetup channel, that's probably the best place to ping questions. While you're in Slack, you might want to check out these channels as well. The Meetup channel, obviously, volunteers if you want to help out with organising. Jobs is always useful, and the speakers channel if you want to do some talks. So before we get into the presentations though, I want to give a shout out to people who have shipped things this month. Let's start with Dave Caddy, who shipped 3 apps this month. I think this is the first time we've had a hat trick of apps. StepGraph is an animated bar chart creator. Podwise is a podcast MP3 metadata editor. And BarConvert is a menu bar unit converter, which all sound really useful actually. So that's really cool. Good stuff, Dave. Matt Dells released a new version of Domestique for all you cyclists out there, so that can help you with your government-approved daily exercise. And Navilla got a new release out of the SUP app. SUP's a hospitality jobs marketplace that connects hirers and workers. And this is version 2 of the app, which was a bit of a big rewrite. They managed to rewrite about 50% of the code base, removed a bunch of dependencies, got some codable in there for the models, and increased test coverage, which sounds like all in all great work by Navilla there. So that's good stuff. If you have anything that you shipped, please let everyone know in the Slack group. And if you want it to be in next month's slides, ping the organizer for next month, who I think is Matt or maybe Sean. But the volunteers channel can help with that. Okay, Chris, we're going to do it now. Jeez. One more thing before we start. I thought Carlos summed up WWDC really well when he said that sleep is very important according to Apple and according to your Apple Watch. We were all up at 4 a.m. watching the event. So that was well summed up by Carlos in that tweet, I thought. First of all, we are going to go to Raunak Singh. He's going to give us his what's new in WWDC, in case you did fall asleep. So over to you, Raunak.
Hi everyone, my name is Ronak, and tonight I'm going to do a recap of DubDub 2020. So I guess from this slide you can see I have pretty much included everyone, and everyone was asleep during this DubDub because it started at between 3 and 4, and all these sessions were around that time. So that's all good. Let's get started. So let's start with who I am. My name is Ronak. I haven't been very active in the CocoaHeads community recently because of some commitments. But many might remember me from the DubDub talk that I gave last year. And I was fortunate enough to start working as a junior iOS dev during this pandemic for Counter. So what Counter is, it's a platform for documenting and sharing your belongings, a tool we can use to help the environment by sharing with each other. We just released our version 2.0 and it's available on the App Store. So if every one of you can just download it and play with it, that'll be good. So the biggest news, So do I like the new DubDub format? You all know because of the pandemic, this year's WWDC had a new format and I personally loved it. And I think Apple should keep a few things around when things go back to normal. 3 things that I loved about this concept was sessions were shorter and hence I could binge on a lot of them and get the information needed. And the online labs were amazing. I attended 4 of them and I think Apple should keep the online labs open for next year as well. And no one feels left out if they don't get the ticket because everything's online. And I guess this DubDub also answered one important question that everyone had, which is who's buying all those Pro Display XDRs? And it looks like Apple itself is its biggest user. So the biggest news that Apple announced at DubDub is the transition of Macs from Intel to Apple SoCs. And it'll happen over the next 2 years, and the new Macs would ship and the first Mac with an Apple SoC would ship by the end of this year. So what this means is you can get better performance per watt from Apple SoCs, but it also means Mac developers have some work to do because now they have to support two binaries of the app, one for Intel and one for Apple SoCs for the next couple of years. But Apple is bringing back is updating Universal to Universal 2, and Xcode 12 will allow developers to bring Intel applications over in just a few days using a new application binary called Universal 2 that works for both Intel and Apple systems. Apple also introduces Rosetta 2, which is a framework that developers can use to transition their apps from Intel to the new SoC architecture. It also means I'm a Mac developer because iOS apps sort of run on Apple Silicon-based Macs. So what's being announced in macOS 12? With the transition of macOS with the introduction of macOS Big Sur, there has also been a change in the numbering scheme. to the numbering screen. The new name is called macOS Big Sur, and this brings a lot of new features, slightly redesigned interface, which is a bit cleaner, I feel, new icons, which I don't mind, except messages. And finally, I don't have to pair my AirPods manually if I switch between devices. And Apple also put a lot of emphasis on the new notification center, which I may use now. Also, if you're a Mac developer, you can order the developer transition kit for $779, which is basically a Mac Mini with an iPad Pro processor. You can use this DTK to prepare apps for the Intel to Apple Silicon transition, so the apps can take advantage of the new SoC and perform better. Next, on to iOS 14. iOS 14 does bring a lot of things, and a lot of those are actually copied over from its competitor Android, but it does implement those features in a nicer way, starting with the app library, which is more like Android's app drawer. So I can spend less time searching for an app by going through all the pages. Next up is system-wide picture-in-picture. So now it'll be good. It'll be good for binging on a few shows while getting some work done on the iPad. And now you can set third-party default apps for mail and browser. Another introduction was car key and additional categories that are supported through CarPlay. So now you don't need a key to open your car in the future if it supports car key. Next is compact Siri and phone call screen. So the phone calls don't actually take the entire screen. It's just like Android does it up the top. Apple also brings ARKit 4, and along with it comes the new Depth API, which uses the new LiDAR scanner available in the iPad Pro, which I think would transition over to the iPhone as well to get a better sense and understanding of the scene. It also brings in motion capture, multiple face tracking, and better scene geometry, and lots more. With iOS 14, Apple also brings in more support for widgets, which is the cool new thing. With the new widget API, with the new widget kit framework, that does all the heavy lifting for us. Widgets are now available in 3 sizes: small, medium, and large, and they can also be stacked on top of each other that users can flick through, or say you can suggest the right one at the right time. You can also build widgets using SwiftUI, which is supposed to be fun, and placeholders. As widgets are not mini apps, and only serve the purpose of supplying information at a glance, there are times when your content is not ready, mainly because of network connections, and I've experienced that on the iOS 14 betas. Hence, the framework provides placeholders so that the widget doesn't look hideous. And I think we need more of these placeholders in UIKit. And now you can place widgets anywhere on any screen. The next new thing that Apple announced with iOS 14 is app clips. These are like mini apps or parts of apps, and they have to be less than 10 megabits and are downloaded on the device when needed using NFC tags or QR codes, or they can be sent across messages, or they can be location tagged in maps and also on Safari. They disappear when you don't need them for a period. But the big question is, does every app need an app clip? Definitely not. Along with that, Apple also introduced a few new UI components. Well, basically one new UI component, and it redesigned 2 UI components in the UI kit. It's menu, date and time pickers, and color pickers. Many serve the purposes of opening quick or extra actions when needed and replace action sheets in certain conditions. The redesigned date and time picker and the color picker bring ease of use and better parity between the iOS and macOS. Now on to iPad OS. With the new scribble feature, you can enter text, draw shapes, and do lots more on any text field. And if you're building a custom text editor, you can use the new Scribble API along with TextKit. WatchOS 7 has improved complications, so Watch app can now support more than one complication on the watch face. You can also share your custom watch face with people, but still no third-party watch face support has been added. And during this pandemic, it is very important for us to wash our hands. So now the Apple Watch can guide you to wash your hands as per the World Health Organization standard of 20 seconds. And Apple also added a few more workouts, such as dance in the fitness app. Apple also introduced Swift UI 2.0. I'm not a Swift UI expert, but a few of the things that I could find on the internet that Apple added with this API are lazy vertical stack, lazy horizontal stack, progress views, text editors, which is basically UI text view, MapKit, sign in with Apple, and grids. Apple was also very big on privacy during this dub, and these are the 4 highlights of Apple's take. There is a new privacy disclosure prompt. The new UI system will be very visible and let users know what type of data each app collects about them. In addition, each app will now also have to disclose precisely each type of data that it's using to track its use across the app. And if your app is supporting cross tracking, you have to request a special permission from users going forward. There is a new camera and microphone indicator. It is a new feature that is added to the iOS and the iPadOS to counter apps that secretly access an iOS device's camera and microphone. A visual indicator in the iOS status bar will light up when the phone's camera and microphone are being used. And there is also a new privacy button in Safari. This new button will show users information about the tracker scripts that are loaded or blocked on sites that they are visiting. So what am I excited about? I'm excited about WidgetKit, new collection view APIs that has the new list so that I don't have to tackle table views, StoreKit testing, because everyone who has ever developed an in-app subscription knows how painful testing, especially how painful StoreKit testing can be, SVG support, and SwiftUI, and lots more. So I guess in the end, after this dub, every iOS developer would be something like this. That's all, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronak. That was great. Before the next presentation, once more, I'd just like to thank the sponsors, Itty Apps, Latitude, REA Group, and Cognizant for their continuing sponsorship in 2020. Next up, we're going to have a WWDC panel with June Chen, James Thompson, and Oliver Jones. June is an iOS developer working at Itty Apps. She's keen to get stuck into SwiftUI now that it's usable and see how that can go on to dominate the world one day, but she's loving UIKit for now. All the way from somewhere called Scotland, apparently. James has been an indie and not so indie developer on various Apple platforms for around 28 years now. He doesn't look that old, but there you go. He's best known for the about screen of his calculator app, PCalc, and for being the Scottish guy that randomly turns up on podcasts and now CocoaHeads meetups on the other side of the world. Oliver is the technical director at Itty Apps. He's been working in iOS apps for many major Australian companies that you know for the last 10 years. And he's obviously well known around the CocoaHeads community. Oops, that's the wrong slide. So yeah, let's break to the panel. Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming along. It's great to have everyone here.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. No worries. Sorry you get you up out of bed so early. So I will just put out to you all first of all, I guess the big question, what do you think is the biggest news of WWDC?
Who's going to talk first?
Well, I think the biggest news is actually the smallest news is the processor transition, because that's like the biggest thing for Apple and probably the most work that they've put into. But I don't think it's actually going to be a huge deal for developers, or at least anyone that's shipping kind of modern code isn't going to have any problem with it. So yeah, that's the smallest news.
Have you gotten yourself a DTK, James?
If I had a DTK, I think I wouldn't be able to tell you that it was on my desk. And if I did have one, I definitely wouldn't be able to tell you that I got my apps running in about half an hour. So, no comment.
Yeah. No, we can't tell you whether or not we got one either.
Yeah. There's been like people have posted videos and unboxings and all sort of things from. It would be nice if Apple kind of dropped some of the NDA now that like literally everybody knows what they look like and what their specs are and all that stuff. But yeah, no, it seems to be the one NDA that Apple really wants to enforce right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, from my understanding of it all, having not touched one, is that it's all pretty easy to get things running, unless you're doing something really quite bespoke. If maybe your app's using assembly or something crazy, because you're doing performance critical code or something.
Yeah, I think the main thing people are running into is if they've got a lot of dependencies on third-party stuff that hasn't yet been ported over, or they don't have source to port it over themselves. Yeah. Which I'm quite lucky not to have those kind of dependencies or SDK dependencies. So theoretically, it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, I can see how binary dependencies would be the most critical thing for a Mac developer. Like if you're using proprietary frameworks, getting those vendors to provide you them with Apple Silicon based binaries, and I guess really they wouldn't even be able to provide final libraries until the actual final release as well. So it'll be very tentative builds of things.
Yeah, but in terms of like previous Apple transitions, this one is going to be the most straightforward, because like even the last time going from PowerPC to Intel, there was like endian changes and you had to be careful of data structures and things like that. And previously, like the 68K stuff, which I realize is ancient history for a lot of people here, that involved adopting new APIs pretty much anywhere you're passing callbacks back and forward. So this stuff, most people I would expect to have like no source changes at all.
I guess also another place where Mac developers might run into problems would be if they have code that hasn't yet transitioned to Metal. So if they're still using OpenGL, legacy support there, or if they're using Metal specific features or GPU specific features that exist on the ATI or Intel GPUs, rather than relying on Metal shader language or something.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who have been doing iOS development might have like experience of that stuff as well now. So that there's some stuff that people have learned from working on iPhones and iPads can be brought back.
I just think. Sorry, June.
Well, I think this is what like people want. Like the future will be like multi-platform, and like in the future, it's not just iPhone that will use ARM-based chips, but also Macs. And yeah, I understand like the first year the transition, a lot of effort and work, but like at the end of the day, it's worth it, right? Because you use your own chips, you definitely have more freedom. You can say you want to put more effort on machine learning, then you can have you can do your own design, and you can decide when you release the thing, like not rely on other companies anymore. Like Intel, you don't have to do the business wisdom, like, oh, I need this to be powerful, I need that to be powerful, and they say, oh, not this year.
No, there's a lot of improvements that Apple could make. I mean if you watch certain tech channels on YouTube, if they do analyses of things like the MacBook Air and how thermal throttled that chip is, like the chip inside the MacBook Air from Intel is capable of performing way better than Apple lets it perform, because of the size and heat constraints of the very thin devices that they produce. And so one of the great things about the Apple Silicon will be that they can bring the engineering and the power per watt that they've gotten on the mobile devices, they can bring that to the laptop. So the devices or the chips aren't so thermally constrained. So you're just going to get, hopefully, a whole bunch more performance out of your thin and light MacBooks and stuff than you would have gotten out of Intel chips. So like as a end user, that's probably going to be the most obvious gain that you're going to get.
Did Apple give any indication of when they were going to start shipping like laptops or whatever actual devices to consumers with the new chips?
All they said was that they were going to ship the first device this year, but they didn't specify if it was going to be like an iMac or a laptop or something. And the first Intel one was an iMac, so there might be some precedent for that as a device. But the most obvious gains that you could get in battery power and stuff would be on a laptop. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be the Mac Pro that's the first device that's shipped. Put it that way.
Yeah, and you know that everyone's going to expect Reveal to run on that device on day one. So,
well, I mean, there's Rosetta, so pretty much everything is running day one anyway.
Yeah, that's one of the curses of Reveal is that because the developers are running ahead of the consumers, Reveal has to run with the developers to help them get their stuff out, which makes it a bit tricky, actually.
Yeah. No, we'll make sure it works. Don't worry. We've got top men on that already.
Yeah. I believe that's what Tony's doing tonight, actually. Yeah.
We are covered.
I think he's moving house.
June, what did you think was the biggest news? Or actually, I can come on to my next question was, did you see a hidden gem that was in there, like something that didn't get much publicity, but actually is a big deal?
Yeah. For me, I think the hidden gems is the huge improvement of code completion in Xcode. I mean, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is that its performance has dramatically improved, like up to 15 times speed improvement compared to Xcode 11.5, which is released, I think, May this year or April this year. Yeah. And I think like some actions like previously that would take like half a second to complete, which is pretty noticeable. And with the new Xcode 12, it shouldn't be that noticeable anymore. It should be a lot more smooth. So yeah, I think it can benefit me or other developers a lot, even though it doesn't sound like a very big, I mean, it's not as big as Big Sur, not as big as Apple Silicon, but these small things do benefit us, I mean, the daily development life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I still have a lot of problems with code completion in Swift UI, although it's getting a lot better. But general Swift is excellent now. It's really, really good. Yeah. Oliver, did you have any?
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm looking forward to any developer, quality of life improvements that they bring every year. I mean, Xcode always does get better. I will always be the first to criticize Xcode for being a little bit behind the times when it comes to IDE features from other development worlds. But yeah, they keep improving it and making it a more and more solid tool. So it's really good. And like the little language features that have gotten in to 5.3, I guess, yes, Swift 5.3, and Swift Package Manager and all sorts of stuff like that will make it so that we, with particularly things like the binary dependencies support and resource support for Swift Package Manager will mean that people can start abandoning CocoaPods more actively. There's just all sorts of quality of life improvements. But I think the most interesting thing that I observed at DubDub this year wasn't really any of the major announcements. It was it was more Swift UI. the foundation they laid last year, there was little birdies was whispering in my ear ideas that maybe Apple would refactor or abandon what they had because it wasn't working, or heavily deprecate a lot of the API and sort of change direction on SwiftUI because it was really kind of underbaked with the first release. And I think the most critical thing really that I observed was actually the opposite of that. They have not really changed any of the basic API. They've just additively added stuff in. They've improved it. They've added different use cases like the apps and window groups and various other things. But also the way it's actually now extending itself out into other use cases that you wouldn't have initially thought it would exist in, like the Watch UI complications and widgets and so on. And I think the model, the programming model that they've adopted has a lot of power to it. So it's like the widgets, for example. The widgets really are static rendered objects. They're not rendered in real time on the device. They're asked for asynchronously out of a background service, and then the system renders them somehow. I'm not sure how exactly that's done, but it's sort of proving the point that UI defined as a data structure can be used in all sorts of different creative ways that you wouldn't have normally. Like you couldn't do that with UIKit. Like it's just not something that would be possible, or not very easily possible anyway.
Yeah, running the app all the time will eat your battery, right?
Yeah. So yeah, widgets are a great example.
I mean, I would say on a similar note to unexpected things was the way the Catalyst got a shout out in like the main keynote. I wasn't expecting that at all, and I thought it would be interesting to see like what Apple's direction was going to be, because last year there was kind of a confusing message because they said, here's Catalyst, which the community had been expecting for a while, and also here's SwiftUI, and people were like, well, we don't know what's Apple's future. So for this, I was going into it saying like, what was Apple investing in? And if you could see them investing in stuff, that would probably have a future. So they did invest in SwiftUI, but they also put heavily investment into Catalyst, and also are now using it for messages and maps and stuff on Big Sur. And it's clear from the stuff that they've been doing, they've been ticking off most of the items that developers have been asking for. Like the big one is that they've got this new Mac idiom. So when your code is running on a Mac, you can actually do 1-to-1 pixels, because previously there was like a 70% scale of the screen. And you can now use more native Mac controls and things like that. So they've been doing the work, and I think it's clear that SwiftUI is the future, but I think Catalyst is the present. And for a lot of people that are doing, or at least coming from a UIKit background, it's probably now the preferred way for them to do apps on the Mac.
Yeah, I kind of see the name being, I think you can read some elements from the name Catalyst, right? Like it's a catalyst for Mac development, right? Yeah. It's not. It's the idea is to try and bring all of that vibrancy that you see on iOS platforms, bring that to the Mac, so that there's a more unified experience, and it gets people buying more Macs. I imagine like there's still a lot of headroom in the Mac, marketplace, right? They could be selling, like they're selling billions of iPhones and iPads, right? They're not selling billions of Macintoshes. So if they can draw people into that ecosystem, say, hey, you get this applications on your desktop computer as well if you want that.
Yeah, I mean, the confusing factor of that is now that they're going to let iPad and iPhone apps run just straight on the devices, like on the ARM devices. And it's like, this is an interesting position. If you're somebody who has an iOS app and an AppKit app, it's like, well, now you might have been thinking about it, but unless you opt out, those apps are just going to run. So. Yeah. That's the one like kind of business wrinkle, I think, out of all this.
Yeah,
I think
it's like new Swift UI APIs, they sort of all behave differently based on what platform it is on. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you get kind of consistent. You get a consistent app experience if you're bringing over your Catalyst app, But it's also a subpar experience. Like especially if you just download you've got an iPad app, and you just download it from the App Store on a an Apple Silicon Mac. It's not going to be a great app experience, right? It will interact. I mean, they've done a lot of work. That was an interesting part of the announcements they made around the Mac was that extensions and widgets and stuff that were part of your iPhone apps or that you're installing on Apple Silicon would participate in the notification center and various other things. So the architecture they're using there is the same, but it's still not going to be a great Mac app. And that's why they're putting so much work into making the additional add-ons for Catalyst for the Mac and adding the Mac idiom and stuff. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing for Catalyst is just not blur a vision. So there's kind of I think it's kind of it's a multi-step strategy. It's like saying, well, you've got a UIKit app now. You should bring it to the Mac using Catalyst. You should adopt additional features of Catalyst to make it a better Mac app. But in the meantime, you should be maybe doing new UI in Swift UI, or bits and pieces like that. And then maybe if you had your app was all Swift UI, then you could not build a Catalyst app, but rather build a Mac native binary and an iPhone or iPad app. And so you'd end up with ultimately, in the end, a convergence of everything coming together, so into one system maybe.
And that kind of seems to be the overall story that's coming out of Apple from all the changes that we're seeing. Visually, Big Sur is looking more and more like the iPad OS. There's giant rounded corners everywhere, which kind of imply what the next industrial design might look like for Macs. And yeah, it's like if an ARM laptop, if that's say got a touchscreen on it, then your laptop is basically a superset of an iPad. It can do everything an iPad can, and then also run sort of more traditional apps as well.
Yeah, I think I'd actually be surprised if I saw Apple produce a Mac with a touchscreen. I know it's quite popular in the Windows world to have touchscreens, and people poking their fingers at their screens all the time.
Some people don't like it at all. Don't touch my screen, please.
I would put good money down on it because I think it's we've got the touch bar, which I got my first touch bar Mac this year, and I don't like it because all I do with that touch bar is accidentally trigger Siri. That is its entire purpose. And I could see, some of that stuff moving I don't think using it as a touchscreen 100% of the time, but using it as a touchscreen for occasional interactions, I think makes a lot more sense. Like if I want to zoom in on a particular thing, I can just touch the screen, and do a gesture and zoom in.
The reason I think it's unlikely is maybe just some previous statements that Apple has made around touchscreens, but also my only interactions with Windows machines that support it is that it's just awkward. It's just not. I mean, in the same way that a touch bar is kind of awkward, touching the screen's a bit awkward.
I think the thing with Apple statements is Apple frequently lies. I mean, it's sort of well known. It's like, oh, we're never going to ship an iPad with a flash storage in it or anything like that, and until such point as they do, and then, well, of course, we've always, going to do this.
That's true. Apple does what Apple wants.
There's that stylus.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that I don't know is an argument. The argument about reaching out and touching and straining your arms and stuff I can see, but And also the fact that, Mac OS generally is not optimized for touch, and that's fine. But if you're running an iPhone app or an iPad app directly on the device, then touching it is the most natural way of interacting with those apps. We also don't know what the form factor of these devices is going to be. There could be sort of the kind of convertible tablet type things.
I could see it if they had the split, like a Windows Surface, Microsoft Surface devices, which can like split off from their keyboard, and which you kind of have with a tablet. I'm very on the fence about the whole idea, because they have all those products. They want you to buy a Mac and an iPad. They don't want they don't want you to just buy a Mac, right? They want you to spend that extra $1,500 or whatever.
I mean, if you look at the iPad Pro, they just introduced a keyboard and a trackpad for it. And if you've got that set up, you've effectively got that device that's sitting there that you're reaching up and you're touching. So they've done the thing that they said they weren't going to do anyway. Yeah. So who knows? But we don't get paid to speculate on these things.
No, definitely.
It's all of that, the kind of uncertainty making it more difficult for developers to kind of plan ahead. Because you don't know, should you use Catalyst? Should you not? Should you write different apps? How much SwiftUI should you put into your apps? You got to support all devices, and you're looking ahead to new devices going, well, maybe there's going to be touch here, or maybe this. It seems a lot more uncertain than it was for a number of years. We had the initial sort of gold rush of everyone getting into making apps, and then it kind of settled down for like 5 years or so, and we're all just kind of doing the same thing for a while until Swift came along. But now there seems to be a lot more uncertainty again, and I wonder if that's going to make people wonder how.
To me, it feels like there's more certainty than there was like in the last year or two. Personally, it's not. There's nothing that says you have to use SwiftUI today, and there's nothing. It's like you don't even need to port your apps to ARM today. There's nothing like that's a sort of drop dead thing that's going to happen. So I'm not too worried about the future. I mean, like Apple have had a number of transitions that have been a lot, and not just processor transitions, but OS transitions and things that have been a lot more violent, for want of a better word. And I think at this point is use what makes sense to you to use, and just go with it.
Yeah, I have a question for you, James. I mean, you've created pCalc, and you've got that on every device, basically.
Yeah.
It has the progression towards Catalyst and what have you made you rethink about maintaining all the different apps for the different platforms? Like, I mean, obviously your pCalc for Mac is probably written in AppKit, right?
Yeah.
And you've got pCalc for iPad and iPhone and so on. Like, is there a temptation to say, damn it, Mac AppKit, I'll just do the UI kit and use Catalyst and extend it where necessary, or is the feature set quite different?
So it's complicated. Like the current Mac version is actually a port of the iOS version that I did like 5 years ago. And because I use a lot of custom views and stuff, I was able to pretty much, search and replace UI view for NS view. It kind of worked. So the code split about 5 years ago, and some features on the iOS side never have made it to the Mac. Like you can edit layouts, and I wrote all that layout editor code afterwards, and it never got backported to AppKit. And so I would love if I could use the same code in both places, because then I would get features for free basically on both platforms. And that's one of the things I've been doing. Like, I've got this dice app which I wrote because I've been playing a lot of D&D online. But part of that was to explore Catalyst and to see what was possible using that. So it's my sort of test app at the moment, and that's actually working quite well. And like with the new Catalyst things that they've added, I can make like a very Mac-like preferences window, for example. But I'm sort of like, what should I do with pCalc? And I think like keeping it as AppKit is not the solution, because AppKit seems like the least popular child at the moment, and
yeah, it definitely hasn't gotten as much love lately.
Yeah. So the question is, do I, because I've got all this code which is UIKit specific, I can bring that over and I can use Catalyst. Right now, there's some things that you can't do. Like you still can't set the position of a window or resize a window in Catalyst, which is just ridiculous to me. But I have.
You probably can't do that in SwiftUI either, by the way.
Well, yeah. I was going to say that. So there's things that I do like with pCalc, like you can have the little tape and registers windows, which kind of attach and move with the other windows. There's no way to do that with Catalyst, and probably SwiftUI. So that I could use Catalyst to bring across and use my existing source, or I could take the core logic engine and I could write a new SwiftUI app around it. And I'm still not 100% certain what I should do. I mean, certainly like long term SwiftUI is going to be the thing, but I'm not sure if that's long term, like 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. At what point does it become that, it's, clearly if you're doing something new or you're, living on the bleeding edge, then SwiftUI is the way to go. But if you have like a vast amount of existing source, Catalyst seems to be the way to go for at least a large amount of apps. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't have the good answer to that yet, and that's what I'm going to spend my summer trying to figure out the answer to. And yeah, messing with my Dice app to figure out what the right direction is. The other thing that I'm just going to do is rewrite the WatchOS app in SwiftUI, because I think it's small enough, the feature set isn't large, that's a good project to get a feel for the current state of SwiftUI. And yeah, go from there.
New technologies is good, but it's like, see, Objective-C still exists. And
yep.
I remember the 2020, this year's Stack Overflow survey, like in America, it's the top 3, like earn the most languages.
Yeah, and I should say that I'm doing most of my stuff still in Objective-C, and this does date me and make me look like a dinosaur, but I'm very conservative in how I adopt these things. And a lot of the time that pays off, because, you hear people complaining about, like at the moment, people are still saying SwiftUI error messages are, fairly inexplicable in what, I'll say one thing and it's hard to work out. So waiting a couple of years on these technologies and letting the tools improve generally seems to work out well for me. I have done some Swift, but I need to do some more.
Yeah, well, in your case, that works out pretty well. In the case of going out to clients as a consultant, have you done any SwiftUI work with companies with itty-bitty apps? Like, would you recommend someone doing SwiftUI on a brand new app these days?
Depends on the scale of the app. Like we have tried a little bit of SwiftUI. We had an internal project which we experimented with SwiftUI on, and for the current client I'm working with at the moment, we have a internal developer tool which is using SwiftUI, but the main application is UIKit. Having said that, we are making an effort to ensure that our code base is ready for SwiftUI so that we can use it more in future, where it makes sense, obviously. There's still gaps and areas that aren't covered well by SwiftUI. So yeah, we're still in that transitionary period. To me, it kind of feels a bit like when when Swift first came out. Like when the first year of Swift, I did a little speaking engagement for the YOW conference people at their quarterly or monthly events, and it was like, should you use Swift UI or Swift for developing your iOS apps? And I was like, hell no. This is like Swift 1. It was very underbaked. And I kind of see that the last year has been the same for Swift UI. It's been very underbaked, but it was around that period of Swift 2 that people already started to use it in anger to build actual apps, and were having success. And then, as the language matured, they had pain points transitioning from 2 to 3 and so on. But after a few years, it was all settled down, and people had, and they could do 90% of what they needed to do in Swift, or 99%. It was only that 1 or 2% that maybe you needed to call some Objective-C functions, or and products like our product Reveal, it was a pure 100% Objective-C project when it got started, and stayed that way for a number of years, and now it sits at about 67% Swift and 32% Objective-C. So it's to be honest, that Objective-C is probably largely just the library that sits in the client app, in the iOS app, and now with ABI stability, maybe that can all be transitioned to Swift as well. So it'll be the same with Swift UI. Like you'll be able to do little bits here and there, and then over time it'll just eventually grow to take over your entire application, and that's probably how it should be, I guess.
I would say the interesting thing is how much Apple uses the technologies, because they're now starting to use Swift UI in bits like we talked about, like the widgets and complications and things like that. Yeah. So it's starting to creep in Apple stuff. Probably 90% of their stuff is Objective-C still at this. Sorry, not Objective-C. It's still UIKit. So it'll be interesting to see if they come up with like major apps, like they just redid messages on macOS as a Catalyst app, and they probably had the same thoughts. Are we going to do this as Swift UI and use the same code base across both? And they didn't. So I think that to me suggests that they don't think it's quite as baked as it could be yet.
Having said that, though, James, they were touting the notification center as being, particularly on Mac. I don't know if they redid the notification center on iOS and Swift UI, but they were like, yeah, this is Swift UI all the way.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense for the widgets and for that stuff. Yeah.
Mm. So yeah, as they dog food more stuff, I think they will. Yeah, you'll see more maturity from the framework, because they'll run into their own problems. They're like, how do we do this? We can't do it. Need to extend the system. And you saw that with them bringing in, the app structures and the app window groups and various other bits and bobs that take advantage of it.
A question from the Slack group related to that. Matt Dells is asking, how would you make an app ready for Swift UI? You've got an app now, you're not quite ready to commit to Swift UI, but you want to get the foundations in place. How would you do that? Is that an architectural thing?
Yeah.
That sounds like a question, sorry.
The way we're doing it is primarily at the view model layer. So we're using a lot of combine, using a lot of published, at publish properties on the view models and things. So yeah, it's really just about trying to be, developing an app in a way that's reactive and sort of has that MVVM kind of split. That's primarily what we're doing. We're not doing anything too special, really. But I think ultimately it comes down to like, where do you place the Swift UI views? Are you putting it at the edge? Like, I think that makes more sense now. Is like, if you want to build things in a bigger app or an existing app, you start building leaf nodes of your application experience with Swift UI, and that way it can maybe percolate out, grow from there.
More of like a mindset change We need to get your head around this in the same way that when Swift came out, everyone spent a year or two writing Objective-C code in Swift, and then their head switched and they figured out how to write things in a more Swifty kind of way. And then we started doing that, and then we got to gradually get more towards more to the functional programming.
Yeah. I think like it really depends on what your existing project look like. Say if it's sort of a RX project, it will be easier for you to change to combine, and if you use MVVM, maybe it's not. I mean, you change your view controller to Swift UI, and then you call observable object, the property wrapper. You subscribe on it, and then the Swift UI view will automatically update for you when like something is triggered, event or triggered or something.
Yeah, the Objective-C IO guys, Chris and Florian, they've done a series of videos converting their app that they did as part of their architecture book, where they did that same app with a variety of set of architectures. They did a whole series of videos where they were converting it over from, I think they used their MVC actually. They used the MVC version of that app, and they refactored it essentially to be a Swift UI app. And encountered a lot of sort of those sharp edges and missing features. Like I think one of the apps, or one of the interactions in that app is like it prompts you for the name of a recording using an UI alert view, and with UI alert view you can insert, or alert controller I should say it's now called, you can insert a text field. That's not possible in Swift UI using the standard alert view object or view struct. So they had to then wrap UI alert controller in a UI view representable or whatever view representable protocol, and then like there's the bridging. You've still got to do the bit of that bridging. You got to like provide sort of the glue code in some places, but they managed to get it converted over pretty quickly. So it's not a complicated app, but it sort of shows you that you can take an existing app and you can retrofit even a basic MVC architecture to work with Swift UI. At least you can reuse the model, which is primarily what they were doing. So it's possible. It's just not. It's more work,
And that's why we get paid. If the stuff was easy.
That's the good point.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's how some of us get paid. Yeah. I've got two UI questions to throw at you. The iPadOS sidebars, the third panel, like Mail has always had, that's just hamburger menus, isn't it? Is it a different name? Secondly,
it could be. You could say it was just a hamburger menu.
First is the Xcode document tabs, and now it's hamburger. Yep.
And I have to ask, because people would kill me if I didn't ask, read-only widgets. That's going to kill my pcalc widget on my iPad, isn't it? And I use that widget a lot, so that's going to really annoy me.
A lot of people use the pcalc widget, especially on iPad and things. And it's annoying because the new widget architecture, as Ola said, is kind of, it's pictures, it's kind of, this stuff gets rendered out and it's more like a complication timeline kind of thing. And it's not it's not just not intended. It's like you can't put any interactive controls in those. And when you tap on a widget, the best you can do is you can have, on the bigger widgets, you can have multiple areas which trigger a different URL, which will open up your app so you can deep link into some content in your app, which is fine for like things like, the music app or the notes or app or something like that, if you want to get to a specific thing. But you can't do anything interactive. You can't do a calculator. And it's like I've had 6 years of that widget being there, and I'm kind of a bit bummed that it's going away because a lot of people use it, and some people use it as their primary way of interacting with pCalc. And yeah, I mean, like it seems like the old widgets, at least on iOS, are going to hang around for a bit. So I mean, they've deprecated the whole old existing widget API. But they haven't said when it's going away. My guess is it'll hang around for iOS 14 and probably go away iOS 15. And on the Mac, the old widgets, at least I haven't tried in the beta 2, but in beta 1, they just didn't appear at all. It does say in the documentation that they will appear. So there's some potential that the stuff will stay around for one more year, one more year from September, October. And then maybe next year we get some different API that will allow some kind of interactivity. Because, I mean, a calculator is like the extreme example. Some people may remember I had some trouble with app review over it in the first place. But, you know, the widgets like a sort of to-do app widget where you just want to like check off something without having to go into the full app, or you want to like start a timer or just some very light interaction, that stuff's not possible. So it kind of closes off a whole range of different apps, which is, you know, I can see why they did it because, you know, for power usage and things like that, you don't want to have stuff running all the time. But on the iPad, you can pin those widgets currently, and it doesn't seem to have been a major drain on battery life as far as I can tell.
Those like the Today View widgets were always fairly aggressively shut down. Like they would capture them as screenshots. Like I built some Today View widgets for ANZ Bank back in the day, and like they would only get rendered on demand, but it was a bit flaky and a bit kludgy and didn't work super well. But yeah, I mean, I think what we need to look for cues to the future essentially is in Big Sur and in iOS will be like what's Apple letting themselves do. You know.
And there are a few things like the shortcuts widget has some it's got like little spinners that run and stuff while the shortcuts are running, and I don't see necessarily how to do that in our widgets. So yeah, they might have some functionality that developers aren't getting. I mean, like the widgets were very constrained. I think it was like you got like 64 meg of RAM or something, and if you went out above that, you got killed. And it was very easy to sort of hit those things if you were just trying to dump a big app in there. So yeah, I think Apple just decided if we're going to be putting these on the home screen and we're going to have them visible all the time, we want to not like impact battery life or even allow developers a way to significantly impact the battery life of devices.
Yeah, I think the other thing they made a big thing in some of the widget sessions about not wanting to see like spinners and things. You know, they wanted the response time to be instantaneous, and so the only real way of doing that is pre-rendering them to some degree. So yeah, I mean, maybe if they can bring more powerful things or exercise SwiftUI in some unique way, maybe they can start to add more interactivity.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that is like an iPad, like a current iPad Pro, is faster than a lot of Macs out there. And it's not like Macs aren't allowed to have like applications running in the background or things on, like a little app in the corner of your screen and all this stuff. So it's, yes, you're sort of, you're going for battery life over the interactivity, but it's not like other computers don't have things like this that, the world didn't end because I have like 10 apps running on my Mac or my laptop or whatever.
Big difference between the iPad and Macs though is the memory, the amount of memory available. So simultaneous, executing simultaneous applications, no swap, all that sort of stuff. It makes it much more difficult to have a lot of stuff running at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that's true. It'll be interesting to see where, like, if we're seeing this kind of convergence in devices in some forms. Like the iPad is getting more Mac-like features with keyboards and trackpads and things like that, and the Macs are getting more iPad-like features. Where is this middle ground, like, between the two? Are we going to have? Is the future going to be a lot more locked down than we currently have on the Mac?
They're gonna be one day you share your screen and I cannot tell if you're using iPad or MacBook.
Yeah.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I don't know. So far they've said no, but
Yeah, again, this is like Apple repeatedly saying no, we're not merging them, where every single thing they're doing implies they're merging them.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's a question I have, is like, what is the future of something like AppKit? If UIKit and SwiftUI are kind of like SwiftUI is the future. We were saying like Catalyst and UIKit is the present. What is AppKit? And like when...
It's definitely the past, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. It's like all those AppKit developers get to feel like I was when I was a Carbon developer, and all that stuff was definitely looked down on. But it's stuff like the I had a really good point I was just about to make there. What was it? Yeah, no, it was with like OS2. If people remember OS2, and it could run Windows apps.
Right.
And
yeah.
The number of OS2 native apps that got developed was, tended towards zero. And I wonder if that's going to be the case with like AppKit apps these days. It's like,
well, it's already trending that way. Like,
yeah.
I mean, we're talking to each other with Skype here, and it's not a Mac app. I mean, it's a Chrome browser that pretends to be a Mac app, and it's just Slack and Discord and God name everything. Practically, it's a Chrome window.
Yeah.
And sorry.
Oh, I was saying webhooks for Slack.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's true on Windows as well. Like, we all complain about Electron on the Mac eating all our memory and being bad. It's worse on Windows apparently, which was why Edge browser got ported to Chromium to make Chromium better. So worked better on Windows. And so the whole desktop ecosystem is getting attacked. By the web, basically, and maybe on the Mac, SwiftUI and native apps and things and Catalyst is a bulwark against that to some degree.
And like all the iPad and iPhone apps that will just run natively. That's going to be interesting. It's like I'll get a Netflix app for my Mac, even if Netflix, doesn't. Well, I mean, developers can opt out, so it's possible that. I think they can opt out of it. So
universal purchase, you can opt out.
Yeah. Not just the universal purchase. I think you can. There's a setting for whether you want your existing iOS apps to appear in the Mac App Store. So yeah, I can see some people like Netflix saying, no, we don't want this. We're never going to do an app, and we're not going to let you have an app. But it will be nice. Some stuff that just people aren't going to do the work that we'll see come over. But yeah, I think that the future of AppKit is looking a little shaky.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, there's a lot of apps that I use that are either Electron based or have their own rendering. If you use any audio edit, like audio software or graphic software like Blender and various other things like that. Like a lot of those tools are rendering their own UI, own custom stuff. So it's like what makes a Mac app these days. It's like it's can be implemented in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. But I think if you look at the UI of something like Blender, it's like, or pretty much any graphics app that you look at, and I have no idea what's going on here. I don't even know how to close this section that I've opened. Where is the thing to collapse this and whatever? So
I think even Photoshop and like Affinity Designer and all those sorts of apps. I mean, they're native apps, but they're definitely not AppKit apps.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still something to be said for a native looking UI, even if it's not necessarily done through AppKit. I think when Catalyst brings all the controls over, like currently there's a few things you can't do in Catalyst, like you can't do a pop-up menu button, which is my bugbear that I keep going on about. You can do a drop-down menu, which is what they added this time, but you can't do the pop-ups that will show a state and let you change a state.
Right.
But once all that stuff comes over, you'll be able to build an app like the Messages app or like the Podcast app was a good one last year, of something that looks and feels like a Mac app. And at that point, is it a Mac app? It was like when AppKit came along and all the Carbon developers were like, oh, this isn't proper Mac. It doesn't feel exactly like a Mac. And now AppKit is in the same situation.
Yeah, what's this next step nonsense?
Yes, exactly. Polluting my beautiful toolbox app.
Yeah.
When exactly is like when AppKit is the most loved children? Is it curious that AppKit is very like popular, like everyone loves him, like Apple wants to like put a lot of effort on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think since the iPhone came along, and UIKit came along, AppKit has been like the least popular anyway.
The unloved first child.
Well, at least Apple loved him before.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think there's still a lot of good AppKit apps out there, and I'd like to think that pCalc is one of them, but the future has got to be very interesting for all of these things. I mean, even if you look at something like Apple's big apps, I mean, you say like Logic is a good example of something that does a lot of custom UI and things, and it's like, is Apple going to start looking at that as we're going to rewrite it all? Probably not, because it's massive. So there
are a lot of that also now. Like there's a shared technology base between Logic and GarageBand. And that percolates over to the iPad, and the same with iWork. Like a lot of, from what I understand, I'm not an expert here, but with iWork, because there's a lot of shared code between both iOS and the Mac, they kind of avoided AppKit. They went directly to core animation and layers and things to do a lot of that work, or they leaned on the cross-platform frameworks like Cortex and stuff like that really sort of divorced them from the dependency on UIKit or AppKit specifically. But obviously there's still AppKit there because it's like the main window, Chrome, and all the rest of it.
My understanding is like SwiftUI and all that is still built on top of whatever the native stuff is underneath. Like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Does SwiftUI render its own controls, or is it just using the app? Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely using the underlying frameworks. It's kind of a bit like React Native in that way.
Yeah, Big Next was making that point in the Slack channel that because Apple have to support a lot of AppKit themselves, and they have obviously a lot of Objective-C, maybe it'll go on for quite some time.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Carbon lasted for 20 years, so that was like you could still like until Catalina came along, you could still run Carbon apps quite happily, and I can't see like AppKit or UIKit even, like, they're not going to go away for like a decade at least, unless there's some really fundamental change that comes along that would stop those kind of things working. But everything's gone over to ARM pretty much, so they're not going to. I think that was the point of Catalina, was kind of to get rid of a lot of the cruft that they didn't want to bring over and have to support on ARM platforms. And yeah, so I don't think anyone should like hear us and think, oh no, I've got to throw away my AppKit app today because it's going to stop working, and that's not the case.
Matt Gallagher in the chat is saying that SwiftUI renders buttons and text itself, but you reuses things like text fields and scroll views and
okay, that makes sense.
Like
and it needs to be smart enough to know which view, like, because you have a view hierarchy, which view needs to be updated, re-rendered, which view shouldn't, if it's smart enough.
Yeah, it tries to be really smart in that respect. Yeah. I think the interesting thing about SwiftUI is that it actually lets, because you're programming to this much higher level abstraction, you're not programming to to the underlying rendered views. It lets Apple iterate on that, right? Like, it lets them sort of change, lift up the facade and then change all the underlying plumbing, and do whatever they want at that layer, as people use SwiftUI. So they could actually unify the rendering technology or framework that's underneath UIKit to some degree. There's still ability to embed native UIKit controls and things that already exist into that view hierarchy, but if they retained that but yet still messed with the internals, they could do that to their heart's content, really. There's no way of escaping the UIKit sandbox, obviously the SwiftUI sandbox in some respects. You're stuck there unless you're embedding specific controls. And if you do start doing nefarious things and reaching out into the view hierarchy and doing stuff, you just ask for trouble, right? So yeah.
That's one of the things they did with Catalyst this year, is if you're running Catalyst, a Catalyst app on the Mac, the SwiftUI stuff will use the AppKit controls rather than like the UIKit looking controls. So that's nice that they're starting to do that. And there's actually, you can do pop-up buttons in SwiftUI in a Catalyst app, which you can't in a UIKit app currently. So SwiftUI got one advantage there.
Right. Yeah. Because
they turn the spinners into pop-up controls automatically.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting times, is all I can say. It's like there's lots of.
We're all in interesting times 100% of the time at this point.
Yeah.
I'm going to change direction a little bit on you.
Okay.
WWDC itself. How did that go? How did you like it? The new format, the new way the talks were released and the labs were done and all that sort of stuff. How did that go for you?
I think it went very well. I was very surprised at the sort of quality of it. I think people were kind of suspecting we were going to get sessions recorded in people's houses and it was going to be, a bit more lo-fi. But, the presentation was probably higher quality than we've had in previous years. Because it wasn't live and they could, craft that exactly. It was very slick looking. And the individual developer presentations were very nicely done. And the fact that they weren't like, they all had to be half an hour or whatever long, and they could just take whatever time they needed was very good. I loved the little the touches of like each person was clearly allowed one personal object to place on the desk next to them. And there was like all these different things like Newtons and like little Lego models of infinite loop and things like that. So there was kind of more personality came through than you would actually get in a normal WWDC. I think everything was better aside from the fact that we lost all the the personal interaction stuff. Like the meeting up with people and the conferences that have sprung up around WWDC, like AltConf and layers and things like that. There's two sides of it. It's more inclusive now because a lot more people have access to stuff and like access to the labs and whatever. It's going to WWDC is an expensive thing, like especially from like when you, like all of us, you're not living in California and can't just sort of like saunter down to San Jose or whatever. So a lot more people have access to it, but also we're missing that in-person thing. Of course, right now, I don't want any in-person thing. I don't want to jump on a plane. I don't want to go to a room full of 5,000 people. That's absolutely the last thing I want to do. I'm not sure I want to do that next year, to be honest. Like, we'll see how it goes, but it's, I think we've all been a bit, seeing a crowd of like 10 people still gives me anxiety at this point. So 5,000 people is not something that I'm planning on. So I don't know what it's going to be like next year. But I think they did very well. And like, given the conditions that they had to do it all in, I think it was really amazing.
And fairly short notice as well, because they probably only really started that in April at best. So I think they did really well to pull it off.
Yeah, I hope at least by the time WWDC 2021 comes around, COVID-19 can be gone forever.
Yeah, we'll just have COVID-20 or COVID-21.
COVID-20. Yeah.
Let's hope not.
Like people like me who haven't been to WWDC in person before, I like how in Keynote they panned across different venues in Apple Park, sort of like makes me feel like, oh, this year I'm one of them. Yeah,
I've heard from a lot of.
Oh, sorry. Because I always think like, oh, the audience, like being there, like in person, they're so special. I'm just watching the videos, but now like everyone's the same. But anyway, I'm still looking forward to, maybe next year or next year, I can really sit there in person. And it's not just the WWDC, like it will be like very interesting, like to, not go there alone, but with like a couple of other like iOS developers or like Mac developers, like a couple of friends, and you have a like sort of WWDC Apple trip. Yeah, they're gonna be very special to me. It's not like you're on business. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you're on a trip, and like it's like an excursion for like Apple.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to sell that to an accounting department, don't say that it's like a holiday that you're going on with your friends. But yeah.
I think the future of that will actually be more special. At least the first year that we can get back to doing that stuff, it's going to feel even better because we were deprived it for a year or 2 years or whatever it's going to be. The first year that we can actually meet up again is going to be like, yay, amazing, I can do it again.
Yeah. I think the question is, like, are they going to do it again? If this was a huge success and was a lot cheaper for them, and it got the information out there, if you look at it from Apple's benefit, not our benefit, why do the big show? Why gather all the people together? And it might be like for a long time, even, when things have settled down, that there's a kind of a stigma to conferences. That they might just decide. It was like if you look at the games industry, like people have been moving, like Nintendo have been moving to not doing these in-person events, but doing these streams effectively, or when they're doing keynote type announcements. Other than having, press to cheer in the audience or whatever it is that you want, what's the advantage to Apple to having us there? I think I would say there's a good chance that we'll never get another in-person WWDC.
Yeah, then
maybe
they won't increase the ticket price next year.
Yeah, it definitely the Yeah, there's a lot of advantages to the way it was done this year, but it is definitely democratized it a lot more. Like, I mean, I've been to Dub a few times, not every year. I've not tried to go every year, but lately I've also sort of flagged it away because it's such a raffle. It's a lottery. Whether or not you go.
Yeah.
It is a huge expense if you're coming from overseas like we would be. And yeah, the advantage, especially with them, even last year and the prior years, the live streaming of the keynote and then the releasing of the video of the sessions pretty much the next day, it devalued the in-person event, except for sort of two things, which was the labs, having direct access to the engineers, being able to have them over your shoulder and going, hey, there's a bug here. Why is this image loading thing screwing with the palette or whatever. And then the personal interactions of, meeting people like you, James, or other iOS devs and Mac devs in face-to-face and forming relationships with them over that course of that week. And that's the area which I think is the most missed, but is also the most privileged part of the event. And so I didn't actually participate with the labs. Ranuk said he did in his overview. I didn't have any questions this year that I needed asked. So I'm not sure how that exactly worked, but it sounded like Ranuk had a really good experience with it. And if they can make that experience of the labs and getting sort of in-person technical support or help better than even being at the event, then the only reason to hold a Dub is those corridor conversations and that sort of in-person fraternization with Apple engineers and stuff like that. And I know people have gotten a lot of value out of that. I know people who have formed continuing relationships with Apple engineers and send them my messages in the background going, what's happening with the UI collection view this year and get little snippets of information here and there that sort of guide them in the right direction or let them, skip through radar/feedback and go straight to the source and report bugs directly and stuff like that. So, but again, that's like not everyone has access to that, and so it's a bit of it's an unfair advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely benefited from that in the past, and I don't think I'd be where I am today without like contacts that I made through WWDC, either Apple or other developers and things. But as you say, it's like if only the people who can afford to spend like $10,000 or whatever on a trip to WWDC get that, and then those are, they have an advantage so that, it benefits them more so they can go again and get the 10,000, and spend the money or whatever. It kind of just reinforces that, elite access thing. And as somebody who's benefited from that, I'm gonna say that I will miss it, but I think not having it means that everyone's on a slightly more level playing field. Slightly more, but
if only Apple would level that playing field even more and just be a little bit more public and open about what they're doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like the new developer forums where I think engineers can post, but they are all anonymous. So you can't see who's actually answering your question, which is like, I get why you're doing that, but it would be nice to know that, this person who works on the thing has just responded to my question or
So you can add him like Facebook friends or keep in touch.
Yeah. I mean, I follow a lot of Apple engineers on Twitter, and you can talk to people that way and stuff. And there are I think Apple engineers certainly on Twitter are far more public than they were in previous years. Even 10 years ago, I think Apple people weren't even allowed to say they worked for Apple, and now you get people saying, oh yeah, I work for this team and I'm doing this, and let me know what you'd like to see. So it's opening up slightly, but yeah, it would be nice to have some way to kind of like make the as you say, the corridor experience happen. And I don't know how to do that. I mean, we've got like we're all talking to each other now on Skype in a way that we probably wouldn't have this year if everything was as normal. But yeah, so that's why I think, if all that's left is the stuff that benefits us rather than necessarily Apple, do they ever do it again?
Yeah, and that's really, because like you say, it's really hard to justify that to an employer. Some people who are extremely lucky can pay for it themselves and go over, but pretty much everyone has to put it through at least the approval of the manager or whatever. And if all you're saying is, well, I just want to go and meet people and have a beer with them, it's not, if I'm your manager, you're going to get away with that. But for most people, you're probably not. So it's a bit of a tricky one. Sean said on the Slack that maybe other conferences will just pick up that slack. And I think that could happen. Like I'd be quite happy if a conference sprung up in Sydney or Auckland or something that I could easily go to for a few days over DubDub, watch the things with other people, chat about it, do the networking, and it costs $1,000 or something rather than $6,000 or $7,000 to go over to California. That could be a thing where you have lots of regional conferences. Apple might even decide to do that themselves. I think that probably wouldn't happen, but I think other conferences could pick up that slack in the way that AltConf kind of was anyway. It was doing that anyway. So that could happen next year or the year after.
I mean, I think Apple gives a certain legitimacy to stuff, like the way all the other conferences sprung up around it in San Jose and things like that. There was a sort of critical mass, which was, I think, helpful to those conferences as well. I mean, it was like, even if you didn't get a WWDC ticket, going to San Jose was still a useful thing because you could participate in a lot of the sort of the networking side from that. And I think with Apple not there, I don't know that you're going to get, AltConf and Layers and whoever else deciding that we're going to have this conference. I mean, Apple did do the tech talks sometimes. Like there was sometimes things down in London that we went down to that were nice, and they would tour them around Europe. And I don't know if they made it all the way over to you guys.
They did. Yeah, they did. Did some stuff in Sydney, I think, out of the Apple office there.
So that could be the model that they do going forward, which would be interesting, but it's not the same. But I think we're just going to have to learn to make friends ourselves and talk to each other.
Some people don't want to talk to each other; just want to hide in their offices and write code. The one thing I've loved about the WWDC app this year actually was not only the different lengths of talks, which you kind of got a little bit when there was a few sessions from last year that were pre-recorded, because you get these kind of more concise info dumps, but you can make them even more concise by listening and watching them in double speed. I like some American talkers. They just talk so slowly. It's like I'm just like twice as fast. Thank you.
I liked the full transcripts as well, so you could just kind of scan down. All right, they're talking about this here. Okay, fast forward video. Have a look. It was a lot easier to get that information out. I also liked, and should call out, the little daily summaries that Serenity Caldwell was doing. I really liked those, just as a kind of, it was a bit more of a personal touch on things, and people got to say their names as well, which was always nice. So, I mean, I think that the conference was a big success in terms of most of the things they did. And, I've heard some people say that the lab times, you didn't get very long. You got 15 or 20 minutes, which might not be enough time to get up to, get the person up to speed on the problem that you're trying to solve. But, I think that they succeeded. And
it's like, if you want me to sit there for 1 hour listening to a session, 100% concentrate on that, it's sort of a bit of tiring. But now I can watch 10 minutes, or a little bit tired, have some chips, yogurt, and then continue.
Yeah, I mean,
that was actually really hard in person when you were at WWDC.
Yeah.
You can't sit there for 8 hours a day listening to very in-depth stuff for 3 days in a row. It's really hard. Like I only ever got to about 2 in the afternoon at the very best at WWDC before that's it for today.
I mean,
I'll watch this next week.
You're jet lagged, and it's like you've tried to go out and collect as many like weird American sweets as possible, like to get your blood sugar to a point where you could sit through another session, and like you're drinking these weird drinks that you don't exactly know what they are, but there's some soft drink, it's got sugar in it and it's got caffeine in it. Fine, I love that.
I fell asleep in an embarrassing number of WW sessions that I've attended in person. So
I made the mistake once of, I think it was like an AR kit session, and I'd been messing around with some AR kit stuff, and I went up to the front. I'll sit up at the front because I want to talk to these guys afterwards, whatever. And then it's like this wave of tiredness is hitting, and you're thinking, oh no, they're going to be looking at me sitting in the front row trying to keep my eyes open, and this is a really bad move. I mean, last year I have to say, not last year, it was 2018. I went to the keynote, and I went to the State of the Union. I think I went to 1 or 2 other sessions, and I spent the rest of the time in the labs, because that was the most valuable part of being there, was being able to talk to the engineers one-on-one. And as you say, make those connections to those engineers. So the sessions, even for the last few years where stuff has been in person, actually physically going to the sessions is not necessarily the best way to spend your time when you're at the conference.
Yeah, definitely. I did the same thing. I think it was the first year that they were live streaming some of it or recording it for immediate release. They had in the bottom floor of the Moscone Center, so it was prior to the San Jose move, they had these big TVs all set up and beanbags and things and around, and they had the labs around that as well. And after the keynote, I spent basically the entire conference in that bottom floor, just watching the sessions on the TVs and chatting with other devs, or going to a lab for some Xcode problem I might have encountered or something.
Yeah, and then sort of nipping across to alt comp for one session because they had something somebody in who was doing something interesting, and yeah,
because it used to be a competitive advantage to go to WWDC when you had to attend to get the latest version of Xcode and whatever on a DVD, and to get access to the documentation things, you had to pay, and that would give you a genuine competitive advantage of a few months over someone who didn't do it. As soon as the video started coming out, initially a day or two later, that was essentially gone, which again takes away another reason to go in person.
Yeah, no, exactly. I remember plugging into the 100 megabit Ethernet connection and being able to download all of the SDKs and everything onto your laptop, and you're like, yes, I've got everything, and scurrying away.
It'd take 2 laptops with you, one to brick and one to use as your actual laptop.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a point where even when they were doing the DVDs, if you hadn't gone to the conference, you had to basically pay the equivalent of the conference fee to get those DVDs. And it's so much stuff is now, it's more democratized in terms of what people can get access to. And I think it's iPhones basically blew that completely wide open. I mean, I remember the days when people would phone you up and from Apple and say, basically, we haven't sold all the tickets yet. Do you want a cheap ticket? And I'm like, yeah, I wasn't planning to go, but I'll go, for half price. Sure, that's slightly more worth it.
Bargaining.
And then it went from not selling out to the days when they were doing it, they would open tickets and the whole thing would sell out in 90 seconds, in the days prior to the lottery system. And yeah, so it's becoming more and more open to more people, and I think that's good. And I think the need for it as a physical event has gone down along with that. And at some point, somebody's got to say, why are we spending 10 million putting on this conference when we can spend, I don't know how much it costs, that's a guess, but why are we spending 10 million on this conference and limiting it to 5,000 rich developers when we have 100,000 registered developers or 1 million registered developers or whatever it is? What's the advantage to Apple?
Yeah, I guess the only advantage I can think of is there's that buzz, right? But if they can produce that same buzz in a managed media event, which effectively all the keynotes are now.
And I think they did this year. I mean, there was still all the talk on, Twitter and on the podcasts and all the stuff. So it's not like this was a subdued WWDC.
No, not at all. We've been going for well over an hour, I think now. So I reckon we should probably wrap it up. I'll hit you all with one last question. We're all Apple enthusiasts. Do you feel more enthused after WWDC than you did before? Did you come away from the week kind of pumped up?
Shun, what about you?
Well, yeah, I spent how long? I spent around 2 weeks to watch the WWDC videos, and then because it's not like previous years, it's like 40 minutes, 50 minutes, it's like 20 minutes, 15 minutes, not that horrifying anymore. So yeah, I like to spend time on that.
But do you feel more excited about certain things, like getting into developing stuff with SwiftUI? Like, are you excited to?
Yeah, I want to. I want to try SwiftUI on my personal project. I mean, I know a lot of people they're very excited about the SwiftUI APIs. But other than that, I'm also excited about how preview, what previews can offer you. It's now in the same canvas, you can put copy different views and with different accessibility settings, like different dynamic fonts, you can see how it looks like in extra large, extra large, or dark mode at the same time. It's like a mini Zeppelin. I mean, yeah, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I've been playing with that a little bit. That is really, really cool. And I think if you take a little bit of time, if you're developing in SwiftUI, and you take a little bit of time to set up your whatever the thing is called, the preview code that you need, and get some realistic data and things in there for whatever screen you're working on, that has a big benefit. I think, I'm looking forward to SwiftUI for that's one of the main reasons, and just for speeding things up. I think Renault said today on Twitter that it's really rare that something comes along that actually speeds you up by an order of magnitude, because you're writing so little code. Yeah. And when you write 4 or 5 lines of code, and then you look at a preview, and it's got everything there, and it's got accessibility built into it, and theming and all that, so it's this is actually amazing. It's such a step change from what you had before. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I have to support iOS 9 for another couple of months, so I'm going to be a little bit behind. Maybe next year before I can really get stuck into SwiftUI, in my work anyway. But eventually, I'm looking forward to that being a very big benefit.
Yeah,
I mean.
And I think to maximize the usage of preview, I also need to learn how to make views more previewable. I mean that's one of the. I think it's one of the benefit of using protocols that will help your views more previewable, so that you can fit in different data to see what your view looks like.
Yeah, no, it really changes the way you start writing the code for that. I know I've done a bit of SwiftUI this year in our current project that we're working on. Although we're not using it, I did a bunch of experiments, and Renaud did a lot of those experiments as well. And it really was striking at how quickly you could get stuff working. It was just unfortunate at the time during the beta period and then even afterwards that it was quite buggy. And so you couldn't depend on it to function how you wanted it to. So we kind of had to step back from it. But and also the learning curve was a bit like, it was great. It was like level, and then you would get something and it was like this, it was like you would everything was all swimmingly great, and then you would run into something and you're like, how do I even do this? I have no idea. And there was just no documentation, and there was just, you had to rely on like Paul Hudson's great site content and various other people sort of reversing what should have been in the documentation to begin with. But yeah, I'm excited by all of the incremental things that Apple have announced, like from Apple Silicon to the newer features of UIKit, the sort of amalgamation of the look and feel of macOS and UIKit. I think it's just going to make developing for Apple platforms that much more compelling. You're going to be able to win arguments. I mean, like, we're working at the moment on an app, and its minimum target is iOS 13.5, probably be 14 when it gets shipped. And now we can make an argument and say, well, it'll work on the Mac as well. It's not as quite as compelling as saying it'll work on Mac and Windows and Android, but it is an interesting development, and I just hope we end up with more of that. Like, if we can make I saw some guy wrote a SwiftUI DSL like type converter or decoder to JavaScript or something. I don't know. So who knows? Maybe in a couple of years you'll be able to SwiftUI target web Go. So who knows? Yeah, it's all up for grabs.
I mean, I would say, like, going into WWDC, for me personally anyway, there's always a certain amount of terror involved in, like, what is Apple going to do that is going to mess me over in terms of business things? Are they going to, Sherlock your app, or are they going to do this, that, or the other? And, this year, yeah, the widget stuff is annoying, but it's something that I can live with. And so I'm always happy to come out of WWDC with my products basically intact. And everything else after that is a bonus. Yeah,
I know if Tony was here, he'd be saying the first thing he looks at is the Xcode release notes section that mentions View Debugger. So yeah, it is definitely the case when you're working with anything that sort of intersects in a way with Apple's products that you've got to be careful of what's going to get what finger or toe is going to get chopped off.
Yeah. But I think I like all the stuff that came out was generally positive, and I'm glad to see Apple investing in various areas that I didn't necessarily think they were going to invest in, and it looks like there's like some big master plan that they're working on, like, and we might not have seen all the pieces of it yet. But I think things are starting to kind of converge, come into focus of what they're planning in the sort of like the next 5 years. So yeah, I think it's a time of change, but change can be exciting.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a plan afoot, and it's just we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, I think. It's a lot underwater.
Hopefully we're not on a boat heading towards said iceberg, but we'll find out.
Yeah, it's terrifying that, like, maybe in Apple there's a roadmap, like in 10 years we do this, like in 20 years we do this, and we were part of it.
Yeah. I mean, like there was tons more ARKit stuff again, and it's like this has got to be heading towards some product, like. And we didn't get it this year, but maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe that's the next big thing.
Yeah, who knows about that one? That one's with Magic Leap going down the Googler. It's AI is looking less promising.
Well, I mean, it's like I think the concept is still a promising one. I just don't know that the technology's like the physical technology is there yet to do this in like the your thin pair of glasses or whatever it is.
And I can replace these with something as equally light and unobtrusive, maybe.
Exactly, and that might we'll have like nanotechnology or whatever it is by that point. But I think once we get there, there's definitely something in AR and VR and all these technologies. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's going to do it, it's the company worth $1.5 trillion that has however many $1 billion in the bank. Yeah. I think they've got slightly more than Magic Leap had, even if they're burning that on car projects and various other things in the background.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, maybe we can meet up again this time next year and figure out the next step along that magic path that Apple are taking us on.
We can do this whole thing in AR, and you'll just be floating above my desk.
Yeah, little avatars around a table.
Yeah.
And like all the furniture at the backgrounds, they're fake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing I noticed actually about Apple Park and about the Dub videos was like they're obviously just in a room and like at Apple Park. But I shit you not, that building and that environment looks like an architectural previs render. Like,
yeah.
It just looks so sterile and so manicured, perfect.
If I hadn't seen it from a distance, the building, you could say, does it actually exist? Did they build it? Is this just like some 3D rendering?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, great time to build a big open plan office building.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, folks. That was really, really good. Very much appreciate taking the time to do that. And to everyone watching, I think we're going to have a Slack. No, not Slack. What's it called? Zoom. Afterwards. No, I think that's right. We can just crack on and say goodbye. I think I had one more slide to show where to go for Slack, the Slack group and stuff like that. But I think everyone already knows that. So, yeah,
it's there, right there at the bottom of the lower third.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, the production value is going up and up each month.
Made with Mac software. Yeah.
Next time, you should make a QR code.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks very much, guys.
Well, thanks for having
me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming along, James.
Oh, it's a lot easier to travel this way than to hop on a plane.
Yeah.
You didn't have to get up too early in the morning, so it's.
Well.
Yeah.
I will find the equivalent of the WWDC suites to get through the rest of the afternoon.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.